In this part of the video, we're actually going to start to make our frame. There's our drawing, simple drawing. Like I said, you can download this from the link that I've listed below, and it's a very basic drawing because it's a very basic thing. These are the posts that we went to Home Base to buy, and these will make a good sturdy frame. So we've got a couple of measurements to make here. Our first one is 810mm, and that will form both of these sides. So we need 2 cuts at 810mm. And we'll mark that. Now obviously the carpenters out there are going to have their own way of doing things. I'm dropping those marks around so that I can then put my marking gauge on and still see where the mark is. And I'm going to mark 3 sides of this. And what I'll do is I'll do one of these on my chop saw, but I'll do one for the benefit of those who have not done this before. I'll do one with using a hand saw, just to give you a couple of tips on how to keep the thing straight. This one I think I'll do on the chop saw because there's a knot right where I want to cut the timber, and the electric saw will go through that a lot easier than I will with a hand saw. Okay, so I'm going to pop that one out of the way. Now to help me with this, I'm going to use a thing called a bench hook, and all that is a piece, in this case it's chipboard, with a block nailed on the bottom, and that block nailed on the bottom stops it going any further that way. It locks it against the bench. Then there's a block on the top which has been cut short of the width of the baseboard. Now I'm left-handed, so in my case I've left this side short so that I can saw against that. If you're right-handed, this block will go flush with this side, leaving a gap there, so that you can use this edge as a good edge for your alignment. Okay, so there's just a little tip for you. Now I'm gonna, when I cut this, if I leave this as it is, there's no support under this end. I'm likely to end up cutting it odd, so I'm just going to get a piece of timber, place that underneath, and that's brought that up nice and flush. Now this line wants to align just slightly this side of my end block. I'm using a tenon saw. We'll start the cut. Now an old carpenter showed me a way of making sure that I was cutting at a dead right angle, and I'm not sure that if you'll be able to pick this up in the film or not, but if you look at the reflection of the wood, this piece of wood, it should continue through in a straight line from your saw, and if it does, that ensures that you're not twisting either way or cutting it out of alignment. So now let's just move that slightly more, and we're going to start our cut. We start off lightly, and again I know the old carpenters will be saying you shouldn't be blowing the sawdust etc, but I'm afraid my means are a little bit limited, and I'm cutting slightly to the left of that line as well, and I'm watching the saw as I'm going through and watching it cutting on the line. tight on that. What I could have done is just applied a little bit of candle wax to the saw, and that would have helped it go through. And as you can see, although that will need a sand off, we've got a fairly nice square cut in that, and that's how you do it with a hand saw. And to do this using the chop saw, again I've supported my timber at one end so it brings the timber level with the plate of the drop saw. I will bring my saw down to start with and just gauge to make sure that my blade is cutting and just leaving the line in. And there you are again, another good square cut. The next measurement that we need to cut is 550 millimeters. Each of these has got a label pinned on the end of it from Homebase, so I'm leaving that bit, cutting that bit off. 550 millimeters. One, and there's two. It shouldn't make any difference on this, but when you're cutting somewhere near to the centre of a piece of timber, it's always handy to mark either one side or the other, it doesn't matter. And in this case I'm just going to put a small light cross on there, and that will tell me that's the bit that I don't want. We're doing the same again, dropping that down either side. My square is being used off of the same side each time, and I chose that side because it's the better side on the timber, to be honest with you, to drop my marks down from and to subsequently cut what I need. And these two I'll actually cut on the chop saw rather than cutting by hand. Okay, right, so with all four cut, the very next thing that I want to do is just take a piece of sandpaper and take off those bits of sawdust splinters from the saw cut, because they can get in the way of actually getting the wood to join together squarely. Plus I don't really want to leave bits of splinters of wood for when the boss uses this loom and ends up with a nasty splinter in a finger. So I'm just now cleaning those up as is, and so that's our 4 pieces of wood. The next job that we've got to do is we've got to find the centre of that timber. And we can do it either using the offcut or using one of these. We'll need to measure across the width, and in this case it's 44 millimeters. 44 millimeters. Okay. Now there's 2 ways of doing this. To set this is a marking gauge. You can either attempt, although it's very fiddly, attempt to measure down half of the 44, which will give you halfway into the timber. Right, so that would be 22, but it can be a little bit fiddly and does take a little bit of practice, particularly as your tools are getting older. Okay, that would be one way of doing it. The other way is to set the gauge roughly at halfway, and then using an offcut, just make a mark in your timber. Do the same again going from the other side. Now you'll see there are 2 dots, which means that this needs to be adjusting so that the pin on this lines up in between those 2 dots. And there you are, bang on central. Now we're going to mark a line straight down the centre of our timber, and we're going to do that by pulling this towards us. This face needs to go hard against there, and hopefully that should produce a reasonably straight line straight through our timber. And we're going to do that 4 times. This is our nail line, which will help us to get all of the nails in absolutely straight and in the centre of the timber. If we now take a pencil and we mark through the centre of the groove that we've just put onto here, it's going to make life a little bit easier for us when we're trying to align our nails. And again, we're going to do that with each one. Let's pop that back up there. And now we're going to fit some of these brackets. There's our 4x30 screws, and I'm actually going to use an electric screwdriver. And this bit's not rocket science. We're going to place that in there and just give it a couple of twists to give it a start. Now, before I put the rest of the screws into that, I'm just going to check that it's flush, and it is indeed flush. I can now just assist those screws by using my bradawl. And doing the same again. They would probably go straight into the timber, but it's much easier if you can just guide that screw in and give it a couple of turns to start with. It just makes it less tricky to start rather than starting from scratch. Okay. there you go, our brackets fitted to the ends. Okay, we now need to transfer some marks onto our side pieces. And what I'm going to do is lay my piece of timber with the brackets on it against it, then I'm going to use a piece of timber, using the edge of the timber against it, to make sure that we're sitting flush. Okay, this time I'm going to mark the first hole with a pencil. Okay, I can now take my bradawl and mark that first hole, help that first screw, put my bracket in back into position, and this can be a bit tricky. Let's see if we can do that screw up. And there's our first, making our right angle on our corner. Okay, same principle. You might want to just stand that up because it will make it easier, and just check that your timber is flush either side. And then with your bradawl, pop a hole in there. Pop a hole in there. And there we go, and we literally repeat that in each of the corners. Right, now we've got all four corners joined together. This is our top. You might just be able to pick out on your video our lines that we marked out here. We need to fit these brackets to the back. So the first thing we need to do is flip our frame over like so. Okay. Now we also need to mark in a centre line again, and it's quite simple to do on these, to be honest with you. Okay. you're simply going to pull that through there. The same down at this end, I don't know if you can see that. Turn that frame round. One through there. And one through there. And then these brackets need to be fitted to our ends. This will stop the thing from going out of square. That should keep it nice and square rather than it going, because when you start to actually put the wool onto there, you can put it under quite a bit of pressure, so it's basically belt and braces, as it were. And these, we'll simply use those lines as a guide for where our screw centres go. It's as simple as that. And once again, we'll mark just the one. Okay, and we'll get a screw into that to get that secured. Lovely. I think that might want to come round just ease that screw back a little bit. Come round so that's central. Same with this one. Slightly less screws in this one actually. And these two. This one is actually coming a little bit close to where the two pieces of wood join, so I'm going to angle that inward slightly to avoid splitting the wood. And there you go, and then we've just got to repeat that on each of the four corners. And so here is our frame so far, nice and square in each of the corners, reinforcement, so you've really got a good strong product there. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to mark out where our nails are going. There are a couple of ways of doing this. You can either use a steel rule. I wouldn't recommend using a tape measure simply because of movement, because you're going to be working from a line here and not on the end, and you'll end up having to do a lot of complicated maths, etc, just to get it right. So a steel rule, and even that for me is not the most perfect way, because each of these nails is going to be set apart at 35mm, and therefore you've got to be able to do the maths on there. So what I've done is I opted to use a pair of dividers now, which I showed in the beginning of the video as optional, and this is where they're really going to come in use personally for me, but it's your choice. If you're kind of good at mental arithmetic, then it may be alright to use one of these. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to set this at 35mm, and the way I do this is I start at 10 and then open this up so that it reads to 135mm. Okay, it's no good starting at the beginning. For a start, at the beginning of my steel rule, I've got a lump out of it, but if I actually put that there and extend that over, it actually only reads 34mm. So I start this on the 10 centimeters or 100mm, and open this second leg out via the screw to 35mm. I can then set this at this union and mark that across at the 35mm intervals. And when you do this, you should always make your start from the same end. So once I've actually got through this lot, I'll go down the other end and then that, as you see, comes out there, bang. Right, I'll go down the other end and I'll do exactly the same from this end. Okay, so we've marked down the sides, and now we're going to mark off each and every one of these down the edge. Okay, so this is the pack of the nails we bought when we bought the brackets, etc., and I've, just for convenience, I've popped them into a box. And so now I'm going to start doing my nail up. So I've got a nail gauge. There is another video on my channel that shows you how I made this, and all this is to make sure that we're going to get them. This doesn't really make them upright, but it makes sure that we get them exactly the same depth. Okay, so it doesn't really matter where I start now. I'm going to start in this corner, as a matter of fact. Just start banging it in. I'm going to put my nail gauge on there and just make sure that that's level. And there you are, one loom, 1 cup of coffee, ready to go. I shall now give this to Jan and she will start threading it, and by tomorrow I expect we'll have another blanket. You might find that when you bang these nails in that some of them are not 100% straight. Really don't, I spoke to Jan about this, don't worry too much about whether they're absolutely upright or not. The difference it makes is negligible. So there you go, there's your finished frame.